think the first thing to say about this topic is that it really addresses one of the most difficult financial challenges households face. In retirement, you have a tremendous amount of risk. There's lots of uncertainty. Missteps can lead to serious hardship, and it's often very difficult for older people to make adjustments in terms of working longer, saving more. You kind of have what you have in many ways. So this is a difficult problem that has not been solved by our financial engineering friends. It's something a lot of people are worried about, and this is what we're trying to do. As a result, our goals were somewhat modest. What we're trying to do here is to provide an overview of the financial planning problem, give people a sense of what the pieces are, and give them a way to understand the whole, let's call it, and give them a plan that'll help them move forward. When our first attempt at coming up with this publication, we had it tested by the William and Mary testing group, and we were shocked. We found that the target population was really terrified. They were very anxious, and they were really not ready to face some of the realities of financial challenges in retirement, all the risks, all the concerns that they had. The mention of annuity, we were, as Alicia mentioned, we were accused of being shills for the insurance companies. There was a lot of suspicion. So we went back to the drawing boards and we really redid this whole booklet. One thing we did is we put our logo on the cover to indicate this is coming from an academic institution, not from an insurance company. So the information they're getting is reasonably credible and certainly objective. We also changed from illustrations. That was the design, to have illustrations as the art in this book. We moved to photographs to give it a more solid and real effect. And more so, we adopted, and this is really part of our whole approach to financial literacy, a notion of empowerment. We're going to help you learn things to make you feel comfortable to move forward. And how we do that is we basically say, well, it's not so hard. There are basically three things you have to do. What do you need? What do you got? And then come up with a plan. It's not rocket science, but it does help organize a process that many people find overwhelming. And each of these steps really isn't that complicated. So first, what do you need? We take, and this is another principle of our approach to financial literacy at Boston College, we start with what people intuitively know, what they intuitively feel, which is their standard of living today. We don't talk about the future or assets or liabilities, but people kind of know what their standard of living is today. And we talk about the future. Can you maintain that standard of living in the future? If you want to enhance it or go down, that's your choice. But at least we give you a benchmark. And the question is, can you stay in the present into the future? And we think that's very intuitive, and it helps people understand the financial planning problem. A lot of these people are in retirement already. This booklet was designed for new retirees. So they already have a sense of what we lay out, that you don't need as much as you did while working. You don't pay payroll tax. You're not saving for retirement. You don't pay tax on all of your Social Security benefits. Kids are out of the house. You might pay more for medical care, but rarely does this overwhelm the general notion that to maintain your standard of living, you don't need as much top-line income. One thing we add here, which is often overlooked in retirement planning guides, is what about your surviving spouse? We know from the literature that surviving spouses, typically widows, often have a bad negative shock, and we want to make sure that this is included from the beginning in the retirement plan. So we only ask 2 questions, and we give some guidelines if they don't want to add up the numbers themselves. A rule of thumb, but you need about 70% of your pre-retirement income to maintain your old standard of living, and a surviving spouse needs about 70% of that, or about half of your pre-retirement income. You can put in your own numbers, but we actually give some defaults. Another thing you'll see is those red asterisks. These red asterisks appear in all of the spreads in the 2 initial sections. What do you need and what do you have? And they highlight behavioral issues that can impede your ability to address these issues. And this basically addresses the need to actually take the future seriously, when you get into the future, your needs will be there. You want to make sure your resources are there. Another thing which is common to all these spreads is we break up the information on the page. There are different kinds of information, and we do that not just to make it easily digestible, but we want the user to actually put the pieces together. That the user actually has to process the information, has to become engaged with it, has to connect the dots, and that makes them more of an active reader where they become processors and actually are doing something. They're not just passive consumers of information. And this has been shown to enhance learning and confidence in the ability to process new information. Now let's get back to your needs. Other than the fact that you need a certain level of income, there are the medical needs. Medical costs will rise for two reasons. One, that's what they do over time, and they also rise as you age. We actually give a number, which is a reasonable number, of what you might expect your medical costs to rise above inflation going forward, and this could become a big number, especially if you're not a high-income person. And then, of course, the big problem of long-term care. That's the big risk. Will you need long-term care? We give numbers. 1 out of 4 will need 1 or more years of long-term care. What does it cost? $75K a year. So you have the money, you're all set. If you don't have the money, there's Medicaid, and you can also buy insurance, and we give numbers there. So again, this is like a quick overview of a big risk and how it might be addressed. And that's it for needs. That's it. Now we go to what do you have? And first and foremost is Social Security. We all know about that. And we ask not only what are you're getting now, but what's the survivor going to get? It's the biggest benefit, if you didn't know. And then we ask about employer pensions. They're declining, but still a lot of people get them. And also other continuing sources of income. And we highlight the fact that inflation often erodes the value, especially of private pensions. And then on the right, we say, okay, now let's take stock. Let's see where you are. These are your continuing needs. These are your continuing sources of income. And get a sense of what your shortfall is. And now we get to the hard part. What are you going to do with your money, and what are you going to do with your house? And we first talk about your money. And we identify 3 things which make managing money in retirement so difficult. The first is that money has 2 competing uses. We leave bequests to the side for now. What are the 2 uses? Well, you hold it as a reserve in case something bad happens, or you could use it as a source of income that you draw down. And this confusion about making this explicit, I think, will help people understand that I have 2 uses, and I have to think about that. I can't confuse that. The second issue with managing money is the way you use your money can create risk. And finally, here we get to the thing which a lot of people start at. Oh, you've got all these financial risks, inflation, risk of return, longevity. It's all here, but it's compartmentalized, and the way you use your money will affect risk. And finally, that these 2 issues of reserves and risk and income interact. The more risk you have in your life, the more reserves you need to hold. The less risk you have, the more you can use your money as a source of income. So it's a risk not just from financial assets, but from long-term care and other kinds of risks that you might face. Then on the right, we basically say, okay, there are 2 reasonably safe ways to draw an income out of that portion of your savings that you're earmarking for income. Again, reasonable advice. You can always buy an inflation-proof annuity, or there are reasonably safe drawdown methods that you can take with little chance that you'll run out of money before you die. And that little asterisk says that most people might think that the only safe thing they can do with their money is to keep in the bank. And that's something we see a lot of people do. We would like to say, yes, there are also reasonably safe ways you can draw an income out of your financial assets. And as we move away from defined benefit plans to defined contribution plans, which are supposed to be about retirement income, yes, you can use these reserves as a source of retirement income in a relatively safe way. And it's, in addition to annuities, there are these safe, relatively safe drawdown strategies. Then there's your house. For most people, it's their largest asset and their largest expense. So we talk about downsizing, we talk about reverse mortgages, and we also say that the house often comes into a financial plan, say upon widowhood, the widow or widower needs the money, doesn't need the house, so that's an asset you can cash in then. Or if you go into long-term care, if you actually go into long-term care, you don't need your house. So that you can think about your house and how that fits into your financial plan. And that's it for what you got. Finally, number 3, okay, make out a plan. Do what you do. And at this point, we were really stuck for a long time. How do you present what you should do? And our great creative director, Ron Campisi, came up with the solution. What do? You give an example. You don't have people solve everything. You just walk somebody through an example of how this is done, and then they vicariously get some experience of how these choices might be made, and they can feel more empowered how they might make the choice. This example is listed in text on the left and illustrated on the right. We start on the right of the right-hand page. They start off with shortfalls, both now and for the surviving spouse. They've got a house and they've got savings. Their choice is to downsize. That's that blue arrow going from one house to the smaller house. That releases saving, so their saving pile gets bigger. It also reduces their monthly expenses. They divide that bigger pile of saving into 2. They hold part for reserves. The other they decide to draw down. The result is they can now have a slight surplus as a couple and a slight shortfall for the surviving spouse, which they intend to address through their reserves. That and rising healthcare costs through their reserves. Now, if you look at the bottom of that text on the left, it says, well, they've got a plan that maintains their standard of living reasonably well for the duration, but they would be hard-pressed to pay for long-term care if they need it. So this is their choice, this is their plan, and you might come up with a different plan. So finally, well, what if you don't have enough? What if you do your first duration, you don't have enough? We have fairly common things. Well, tighten your belt. See if you can move to a more sustainable standard of living. You can return to work. Again, older people don't have that many options. Those are 2. Or you could do things that we recommended earlier or suggested that you could do that a lot of people don't do. People do not downsize, it seems, except in terms of a financial crisis, not as a long-term financial plan. People tend not to use their financial assets as a source of income, either by buying annuities or a disciplined drawdown strategy. You might think about doing these things which people are really anxious about. And finally, in that box in the middle, we say, you know, life has risks. You're not going to eliminate all risks. It's important to have plan B and have a sense, if we need long-term care, what are you going to do? You don't have the money, you can move in with your kids, you can go on Medicaid. What if we have a financial downturn? What are you going to do? So you have some notion of a way to respond to risk. And this was mentioned in one of the presentations earlier. And then finally, what do you do if you do have enough? And this in some ways is the great payoff of coming up with a reasonable plan. If you have enough, well, you don't have to worry about your needs anymore. You can spend more freely. You can give money to your kids, or you can give to charity. You can invest in risky assets, and if the market goes up, you can go to Paris. And if not, you can be comforted that your basic needs are met. And we think that this is really one of the great contributions of financial literacy, is to put people's mind at ease. It's not that, oh, I can afford a boat, or I can get that digital camera, I can rejigger this or that. It's this peace of mind that you're all set and you can do other things in your life. And this we dangle as the great reward about getting to work and coming up with something that allows you to do that. And finally, we use the common refrain, do it now. We repeat in the text a lot of the behavioral impediments that were in those red asterisks that might prevent you from seeing what you have to do or doing what you have to do. And on the right-hand side of that page, we have an advertisement for a product, which you can see at our booth, Curious Behaviors That Can Ruin Your Retirement, to help you explore those things in greater detail. And as we develop more products that will address long-term care issues, medical insurance issues, downsizing, work opportunities, they will also appear either here or on the back page. This is where you go. Again, this is like an overview to give you that large context. And as we have other products, we'll put them on this page. Hopefully, when you come back next year, we'll have more of these products on this page for you to see. Thank you very much.